Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've all had an incredible day of conversations. I think I sat in all of them. It was really enriching, and I wanted to be in every single one the whole time. So I hope you all enjoyed it. We have one final conversation today, and it's my privilege to introduce the moderator for that session, Professor Ken Schatz. Professor Schatz is the David and Ann Barlow Professor of Political Economy. He's also a professor at the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability. Ken's research focuses on game theory, entrepreneurship, and electoral accountability. Thank you. Ken also teaches the Leading with Values class in the core MBA curriculum, and he was also the co-chair of the task force that started this entire initiative. So it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Ken Schatz.
Thank you so much, Maria. And it's my pleasure to introduce the person you're actually here to see, who's Patti Poppe, who's our last guest speaker for the entire event. So Patti Poppe is CEO of Pacific Gas and Electric Company, one of the largest utility companies in the United States. They have about 28,000 employees. They supply natural gas and electricity to about 16 million people in Northern and Central California. Now, those of you who are familiar with PG&E hear a lot about PG&E in the news. Those of you who are less familiar with PG&E should know that it's a publicly traded company that has faced a lot of challenges in recent years. So in 2010, there was a gas line explosion in San Bruno, California. In 2017 and 2018, there were major fires, including the Camp Fire, that basically sparked by, my understanding is, power lines that killed about 84 people in Paradise, California, destroyed the town. The company actually pled guilty to criminal charges of involuntary manslaughter. There were lawsuits, billions of dollars of settlements, and the company went bankrupt. And Patti Poppe came in as CEO of the company right after that. She came in, I want to be very clear about that. So she came in 2021, and this is a company that has had a challenging past, but also has a lot of challenging things going forward. You know, facing questions not just about grid safety and things like that, but also capacity, use of renewables, how to handle and structure billing and pricing and things like that. Before she was at PG&E, Patti Poppe was president and CEO of CMS Energy and its subsidiary, Consumers Energy in Michigan. She also ran a power plant for DTE in Michigan and also ran a plant for General Motors. She earned her bachelor's degree and her master's degree in industrial engineering from Purdue University. And I just confirmed backstage, she is indeed a fan of the Boilermakers. So they're in the Final Four for those of you who don't follow men's basketball. And she earned her master's degree in management as a Sloan Fellow at the GSB in 2005. I would like you to join me in welcoming Patti Poppe.
Well, Ken, I was going to thank you for that kind introduction, but I think I'll It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for coming. And thank you for your willingness to engage in a conversation about some challenges that PG&E has faced. And I appreciated, so Patti said that she was happy to take questions from the audience. We'll have some time for that at the end of the session for live questions from the audience. But first of all, I want to have a conversation where we acknowledge the elephants in the room and talk about the elephants in the room. So that's why folks at PG and I just decided up front, just get that out there on the table.
That's right.
First question I have for you, though, is when you took over as CEO of PG&E, this is a challenging job to take on. I mean, one of the questions that someone who's in the audience actually submitted electronically beforehand was like, wow, that is a really challenging situation. What drove you and what motivated you to want to take this on?
Well, yeah, I think it goes to when I was originally being recruited for the job, and there were multiple times that I said, no, thank you. I got a good gig here, everything's fine. But our board chair, Bob Flexen, made a very compelling point. Two things. One, he said, first I asked him, is this a financial turnaround or an operational cultural turnaround? Because if it's a financial turnaround, I'm not interested. Truly, that's not my jam. But if it's an operational, culture-changing, safety orientation, turnaround of what should be an extraordinary utility, then I'm in. And so that was one thing. And and he assured me it was operational and cultural, that it was no doubt the financials will follow performance. And then the second thing was just, he suggested that I should consider this as my professional final exam. That everything I have learned and everything I have done needed to be put to bear, and that the people of California deserved a high-performing PG&E. And, you know, after all, it's just a utility, right? I ran a great utility. I know what a great utility can look and feel like. And the opportunity to make PG&E the PG&E that the people of California desperately want and deserve is my great life's challenge.
And was the final exam at PG&E more or less difficult than the final exams when you were a Sloan Fellow here at Stanford?
Yeah,
and I won't ask about the industrial engineering ones, because I assume those were really hard. But
no, those are all theoretical. This is like the real deal.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, when you're talking about a culture of safety, so I had the interesting experience of, I taught some executives at PG&E after the San Bruno accident and before the campfire in Paradise.
Yeah.
And I was struck in that setting that it seemed that there was an attempt to imbue a culture of safety, because like literally every morning there was the discussion of, here's our safety procedures for the day. And I'd never seen any other company do that. And then when the campfire happened, I looked back on that and I thought, you know, do I know what was going on? And were there cultural issues, or was it partially just bad luck that this happens? And how do you go about thinking about building a culture of safety, given that that's such an important thing for PG&E to do?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things about that. One, we still start every day with safety. We start every meeting with safety, but that is insufficient. And I think your point is that proved to be true. To have a safety culture takes a mindset of every moment is a moment to reinforce safety. We have a stand, the leadership team took a stand that everyone and everything is always safe. And we say it like that because we're going to cause that to be our truth each and every day. But that takes every job, every action has to consider, what do I do if something goes wrong? And I would say we have a real gem in our nuclear power plant, Diablo Canyon, and our nuclear industry nationwide has a tremendous safety culture embedded in the operations of those plants, born out of crises. And the follow through and the development of a safety culture, we just have to look to that blueprint and see that there's a fail-safe mindset that says you can't actually. I've sometimes heard operators, you have to trust your instruments. No, actually you have to assume the instruments will be wrong. No, you have to assume that your PPE will fail. No, you have to assume that the wind will come from a direction you didn't expect. And so then you have to build in the buffer of safety, so that's both a technical issue but then a culture issue of making it safe to say, stop the job, something has changed. And I can tell you when I came to PG&E, one of the early things we did was establish our purpose, and our purpose is delivering for our hometowns, serving the planet, and leading with love. And a lot of people question that whole leading with love business. They're like, are you running a utility or what?
I was going to ask about this a bit, actually.
So I'll go there because it very much relates to safety. And so I'll just make the point here that I have had the unfortunate duty and experience to attend funerals of people who have died on the job. And the expression of love in those circumstances is overwhelming. And my observation is that it's too late. You missed the moment to demonstrate your love for another human being by stopping that job where that happened. By having the courage to say to someone more senior than you, wait, I don't understand. Or, are you sure that's safe? That culture takes decades to create. I think PG&E did learn a lot through those early instances. We did learn at our nuclear power plant what it means. We just had to deploy those lessons that had been learned in pockets to the whole enterprise and have an expectation that we would have a way, a PG&E way that is based on that purpose, and that leading with love is something that we do every single day. And I'll just add this. My union president, who I don't think would mind me telling this story, said to me one day early on in my tenure, he's like, Patty, you got to drop that lead with love business. Like, that's not good. You're losing credibility. I said, oh, Bob, no. Wait, buckle in. There's more where that came from. I'm going to love you right through all this. And then fast forward, you know, a year or two later, he pulled me aside and he's like, you know what, I think there's something to it. He and I attended too many serious incident reviews. And we know that at the heart of PG&E's transformation, for us to make our communities safe, we have to insist that we keep each other safe. Mm-hmm. And so that really, the safety culture is on a journey. We're on a commitment that everyone and everything is always safe that will never end. We're always going to be working to make that better. And we've got tremendous statistics to back up the improvements to date, but we're not finished. We're not satisfied with that.
Well, I don't want to just ask you about safety. I thought it was important to
good.
address it, but I also want to, as I think about like, what do people want out of their utility?
Yes.
You know, probably to a first approximation, people want it to be cheap and they want it to be reliable. Mm-hmm. And then some people have cared more about safety recently, some people care about it being green. Mm-hmm. And so I have questions that relate to that. So the first question is, how do you think about like planning and investing for the future, in particular thinking about things like baseload capacity, which is, you know, if you're going to have more electric vehicles, you know, drawing on the grid, and especially if Diablo Canyon is shut down, you know, how do you think about planning that strategically going forward for the company?
Well, we think about this all the time, and I consider myself a climate optimist. And I'm here to assure you that the grid is not only ready for those electric vehicles, but we need the electric vehicles, and I'll explain that here in just a second. But I think there is a hierarchy of needs. And the hierarchy of needs absolutely begins with safety at the foundation. We have to have safe infrastructure. Now, the fact is, given climate change and the changing extreme weather conditions, that creates a different standard required for that infrastructure. So I actually think it's going to be the biggest opportunity, the biggest era of change in the way we define safe infrastructure is happening before our very eyes. And we here in California have the opportunity to lead the world in building infrastructure that is resilient to extreme climate conditions, not just wildfire. Wildfire caused by droughts is certainly a hazard that we have made dramatic progress, reduced 94% of the wildfire risk on our system to date. But that's just the beginning. We had a blizzard warning in the Sierras for the first time this year. We need to have infrastructure that's resilient for not just wildfire, blizzards, winds, tornadoes. We had a tornado down by San Luis Obispo. Like, we need infrastructure that's resilient to that, particularly given the demand that decarbonizing the economy will be borne by electrification. It is absolutely possible, everyone, to have climate-resilient infrastructure that is affordable and reliable. We just have to engineer it to a new standard and build it to that standard where necessary. So I certainly could talk more about that, but what I can tell you is there's lots of reasons to believe that the infrastructure transformation that will occur in the next decade and then maybe another decade after that will lower costs for customers and increase the safety and resilience and decarbonize the economy.
So I had a question about costs, actually, that
Yeah.
sort of relates to this, which is one of the big infrastructure improvements that my understanding is PG&E wants to do is undergrounding, which is probably really good for people who are at risk of wildfires, probably really good for the workers who do the work, because that's a lot of employment. But my understanding is it's really expensive. Like it's a few $1 million per mile is my understanding. And I've heard some criticism, and this is a question someone asked me.
Yeah,
so
please.
this is someone came up to me and was like, hey, you know, this is a question, you know, it'd be good to talk about. And was, that this is an investment that costs a substantial amount of money, and if PG&E gets essentially something that's like a guaranteed rate of return on investment, that gives a big incentive to do large capital projects. So the concerns that some people had, and I know you've heard these concerns because
they're good.
people,
It's a good
you're
question.
like, oh yeah, I've heard this a lot.
That's okay.
So I'm curious about your thoughts about this criticism that it's like good for the company but overly expensive compared to other ways of reducing the risk of wildfire. So I'm curious about your thoughts about that.
I have so many thoughts about this,
Okay.
but what I will tell you, a couple things. The investor-owned utility model, which I think is at the heart of the question, like, does it work? Does the investor-owned model, where you are incentivized to invest in infrastructure, does that, in fact, create a disincentive for affordability for customers? I can assure you there is a winning model where everyone wins. And let me explain how it works. We call it our simple affordable model, and it's one I employed at a different utility to great success, and we're in the early days here in California, and those of you who are Californians and have the privilege of being served by PG&E, and I have the privilege of serving you, will find that this is going to be very beneficial for you. But let me explain how it works. It starts with the idea that we do have to invest in infrastructure. And originally, the model was designed to reward infrastructure investment so that you could spread out the cost for customers over a longer period of time. When we invest in capital, we get that financed through debt and equity, and we spread out the cost then for a customer instead of paying it all the minute we spend it. So it's beneficial because it spreads out the cost, and then it's beneficial because the maintenance of that equipment is less. You have to spend less on maintenance of on a new system than an aged system. So and when we were building all the power generation and the assets and electrifying our rural communities across California and up in the Sierras, the whole idea is that by sharing the cost broadly across the state, you could then invest in infrastructure that actually lowered prices year after year after year. So the unit price went down. We are about to enter that era. And I know it feels hard to imagine, but let me explain how that works specifically with undergrounding. So undergrounding is and by the way, our undergrounding plan is for 8% of our lines, not 100% of our lines. We have 8% of our lines that are in the highest fire risk areas, and they're high fire risk areas because they have enormous tree density. And any of you who have traveled to the Sierras or up into Shasta County, some of the most beautiful places in our state, part of what makes them beautiful is all those trees. Part of what makes them dangerous is all those trees. And so we need to bury those specific lines. Those specific miles are actually also the place where you have heavy snow cover. We had outages 2 years ago where people were out of power for 2 weeks because we couldn't actually get to the people. That's not modern infrastructure. We live in America. We expect the lights to turn on even when it's snowing. And we expect to be able to be safe in our homes even when the wind is blowing and there's been a drought. So in those specific miles, we can invest in that infrastructure and defer then and reduce the cost of maintaining those overhead lines and trimming all those trees. It might shock you to know that we spend $1.8 billion a year trimming and removing trees in California. The U.S. Forest Service spends about $600 million trimming trees in Oregon, California, and Hawaii combined. That's what PG&E customers are paying for today. That is unacceptable. We need infrastructure that does not need to have that kind of maintenance cost that, by the way, that vegetation management expense is passed along to you annually. That's why your bills just went up. We have to change the way we expect infrastructure. So here's the good news. We can attract capital from the capital markets to invest in an infrastructure and reduce then that operating expense, spread out the cost of that infrastructure, and your bills will go down. The trade is in your favor. It is an economic and a policy choice that our commission, the CPUC, asked a lot of questions, and one of the great things about an investor-owned utility model is you do have oversight. You don't get a blank check. You have the obligation and a very transparent public proceeding where you have all sorts of opinions. It's a whole adjudicated process to come to a conclusion. And there was a time when our CPUC here said never undergrounding. We're never going to approve it because it's too expensive. What we have all learned, and these are professionals who run the CPUC, they have learned that it's too expensive to do what we're doing. And all of our customers are experiencing that in the bills they're receiving right now. We can reduce the cost of delivering energy if we can transition to real infrastructure investments in the right places, 8% of the system, and then reduce that vegetation management expense. We can trade $1 of expense for $7 of capital and keep the bill the same. So you trade $1.8 billion a year. Now you're talking about $14 billion of available spend for capital, which keeps costs the same. Imagine if you spent less than $14 billion. So that's what we're doing. We're spreading out the cost, investing in infrastructure, and that return on investment then is an attraction to the low-cost capital that we need from the capital markets, who, by the way, the investors, the shareholders of PG&E stock are the kind of people that you would want to own, and they're retirees, pension funds, teachers, firefighters, police officers. Of course we want to promise a return. When they put their nest egg in our hands, we use that wisely. We provide a small return, then a predictable return, predictable financial performance. Why wouldn't we want those people to have a return on their investment in our infrastructure here in the state of California? So when we can show with our simple, affordable model, capital investment offset by operating expense reductions, our most recent rate case, it was 4 years, 23, 24, 25, and 26, had an average increase, a compound average increase of 3% for each of those 4 years. In the face of inflation that we absorbed from the previous 4 years of 6 to 8%. So a 3% increase over this period of time, and over time showing prices going down because we are doing more infrastructure investment and less annual maintenance Band-Aids that get passed along to customers annually. That's how bills go down, while infrastructure investment goes up. So I don't see a trade-off or a choice between serving customers or shareholders. In our model, and successful utilities across the nation employ this model, that model serves customers and investors, and there doesn't have to be a loser in this equation. We can all win, and that's what we're working on.
But even conditional on what you're doing, isn't it in the interest of the investors if the rates, given holding fixed the behavior of PG&E, isn't it in the interest of the investors to have higher rates rather than lower rates, conditional on whatever investment is being done, and interest in the consumers to have lower?
No, that's not true. That's a great question. It's easily misunderstood. First of all, my investors, the first question I get in every investor meeting is, how are your prices? Because they know that a regulator can't say yes to prices going up and going up and going up, so it puts at risk their investment. So investors very much care about that reasonable rate for the service that you deliver. So that's thing one. I can assure you, universally, that's the number one question I'm getting in investor meetings. But more importantly is when you can take, and here's the great news about California specifically, and decarbonizing the economy is going to be a great era for California and the world. But as we invest in the capital necessary and we offset it with operating expenses, and then we layer in load growth. We haven't had load growth in decades. When we can have load growth through electrification of transportation and electrification of buildings, and the decarbonizing of our heating, water and building heating, and then add in data centers. I know that was a topic today, and the energy load for the AI computing power, especially right here in this area. That load growth can actually then provide a platform to reduce costs. In fact, our forecasts show this. We can decarbonize the economy by 70%, and household energy spend will go down by 30% at the same time, because electricity is more efficient than gasoline as a fuel. And as we transition to an electrified economy, household spend on energy will go down. Therefore, we can both decarbonize and save household spend, an increase in the economy out of the energy and into growing our economy in other ways. So I personally am extremely excited about this era. We haven't been in this era in such a long time. People don't know to recognize it for what it is, which is why I'm so glad you're all here today. This is a time to be optimistic. We can both decarbonize the economy and lower household spend on energy simultaneously. It's a great time to be in this business.
So I have one more question before I open the floor for a couple audience questions, which is, so many of the decisions that PG&E makes is partially in concert with working with the regulator, right, with CPUC. But they almost feel like public policy decisions in some sense, right? Because, if you change to a rate structure that makes some of the rate depend on people's income, there's some people who are going to like that. There's some people who are going to hate that. If there's net energy metering, there's some people who like net energy metering. There's some people who hate net energy metering. For Diablo Canyon, there's some people, including environmentalists, that would love to have Diablo Canyon stay open as long as possible. There's other stakeholders that would like to shut it down as soon as possible. Like, how do you think about all those different stakeholder groups when you're interacting with society as a whole out there?
Yeah. Well, I always start with our customers. I know that sounds trite, but it's true. And we look and we say, on the whole, how do we best serve all people? We have both the privilege to serve, but an obligation to serve as well by construct. There are multiple stakeholders, so there are a lot of voices in these decisions, and not one of us has the authority to make these decisions in a vacuum. I don't get to make decisions in a vacuum. The CPUC doesn't. The legislature doesn't. We have a representative government that allows for people to become experts, and we have a regulated industry that has expertise regulating the actions and the choices that we make. So we definitely look at the pros and cons of all of these kinds of decisions. When I think about the safety and well-being of the people that we serve and the ability to thwart the effects of climate change, the ability to set the pace for the world on decarbonizing our economy and proving that there's a way to do it at a lower cost, I think there's no place better than California to lead that way. And I think we have the system. It can be messy. Democracy is messy. When we have, right? It's hard to have all these voices, but those voices make us better. And we listen to one another, we learn from one another, and then we have expertise that we put to bear. When I thought about taking this job, I reflected back on early in my career. I remember wondering, how do those CEOs know what to do? Like, how do they know? And then I was one. And I wondered, how did those CEOs? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Well, they went to business school. That's how they know.
went to Stanford Business School.
And the professors knew what to do.
Specifically Stanford. But no, what I realized is experience is a very good teacher. And I knew from all of my experiences, and I've been in operations my entire career, I'm much happier in a pair of boots than a pair of heels. A hard hat is much better than a hairdo. And I have learned that it takes people, purpose, and a performance playbook. And that's what we're deploying at PG&E. And as we perform, we then have the power to influence the outcomes of those decisions. We prove ourselves. In fact, our theme inside the company for 2024 is trustworthy. It's one of our virtues. That to be trustworthy takes fulfilling our promises. It means doing what we said we're going to do and doing it well. So when we made a commitment to bury 350 miles of line last year, even when we were faced with a lost first quarter, if anyone remembers, the atmospheric rivers, all 15 of them that happened simultaneously or in sequence, for us, that meant 90 of 100 days in emergency posture, restoring power to people across the state. We lost a quarter of construction time, and yet we still delivered 350 miles at the end of the year. Why? Because we have a performance playbook. We're using lean operating tools. We're using something we call breakthrough thinking and something that we call our safety management system. We have trained our leaders to deploy this system. I just attended a graduation of our first-line supervisors. I had about 70 first-line supervisors who completed a year of training and development. Some of them have 20 years with the company and never had a training and development course as a first-line supervisor. We are investing in our people, we're leveraging our purpose, and then we are training skills through our lean operating system, our safety management system, and breakthrough thinking to transform how energy is delivered by PG&E to the people of California who have, gosh darn it, high expectations. We're going to meet them.
Well, you were talking about other voices in the conversation, so I'd like to offer
Yeah.
for a couple other voices to join the conversation and ask questions. Over here, ma'am. Could someone get a, yes, okay, we have someone with a microphone. Yes, it'll work much better with the microphone than if you shout, yeah.
First of all, thank you so much. I love your energy and I love your optimism. And
Well, you better have energy if you're running the power company.
I think so. which is why I mentioned it. I'm Katie Vogelheim. I'm with the Human and Planetary Health Initiative over at the Woods Institute. And my question is around community solar. So there was a recent decision by the CPUC. I don't know whether it's going to stick in the way that it is, but basically the three largest utilities came against the community solar folks with the net value billing tariff. And other states have gone forward with this approach. I think it would be very helpful for us to meet our goals in the state and incredibly helpful for low-income communities who I think really need this service. So I would love your perspective.
Yeah. So both rooftop and community solar are a very challenging subject here in California. Let me just start by saying solar has an incredibly important role in the clean energy transition. I will start with that. The important thing is getting the price right. And when you asked, Ken, about how we take competing demands and desires, how do we think about that? This is a very good example of how we have to think about serving all. I can tell you today that a customer who does not have solar has a $30 a month higher bill than someone who does. Not because of their energy usage, but partly because of their energy usage, but mainly because they're not paying for the full cost of the grid. So even on a community scale, the price has to be set properly. Our tariff today it was important when it was initiated. So I want to be clear about that. There was a time when it was necessary to have the net energy metering cost allocation to incentivize the investment in a new technology. And I love California for that. That supported wind. The cost of wind has come down. The initial subsidies on solar, the cost of solar has come down. Same thing's happening on storage. It's good, but it can't be forever. There has to be a point where we graduate from the subsidy. And so in this case, today, when affordability is so top of mind for so many people, we need to look at all of the policies that perpetuate an unnecessary cost shift. And $30 a month is very meaningful to the customers of California. And so when we think about the policy changes, it is the genesis of now what is being recommended, and there's a proposed decision on the fixed charge. And the fixed charge, which at one point, I mean, somebody should have checked in with the marketing and brand team here at Stanford before they called it this, but somebody called it the income graduated fixed charge. That was a very bad name, and it was very distracting. Let me explain two things about the fixed charge. A fixed charge for customers, for all customers, is important because it equalizes out then the utilization and the use of distributed resources. So for example, at my house, I have solar. I bought the house. It had a 14 kilowatt solar system. In fact, the guy who sold me the house said to me, "Patty, I did a real good job for you, putting in the solar system, right, for PG&E." I was like, I don't know. But as a customer, I was like, I'm new here, but I'm not sure. But now, as a customer, I'll tell you, yeah, it's awesome that he made that infrastructure investment, but I get paid too much for that. I actually make a donation to a environmental equity fund to offset that because I have remorse about that, and I can't talk out of both sides of my mouth. So the idea that the idea of a fixed charge says Patty Poppy lives at a premise who has a wire to my house because about 45 days of the year I still need the grid, and the pole at the end of my drive are not cheaper because I only use them 45 days. They cost the same to install, maintain, confirm, make fireproof, all those things. So the fixed charge is designed to reflect the cost of just the maintenance, the ongoing maintenance and fixed costs of operating the grid, and then the benefits of usage from solar can be leveraged by the people able to invest. Now, I'll just say this about the fixed charge recommendation from the CPUC. I think they did a good job listening to a wide spectrum of people. They matched the fixed charge that SMUD, the Sacramento municipality, already has. It's a $24 fixed charge. The income graduated part is confusing because our current rates are already income graduated. That actually was not the change. We currently have 3 tiers of rates. We have a rate for our most vulnerable customers called the CARE rate. We have a fairer rate for middle income customers, and then we have a higher rate for everybody else, which is about 60% of the population. So there's already 3 tiers that are, by the way, income graduated. The fixed charge also, unsurprisingly, has 3 tiers that match those exact same tiers. And then so the fixed charge for the most people is $24, but it's $12 for the middle tier and $6 for our most vulnerable. So the fixed charge, I think, is good policy. We were directed by the legislature to implement that policy. It was not our original idea, but I do support it, and I think it's good that we'll implement that. But coming all the way around to your point about community solar as a point of access for those people who maybe don't have a rooftop or somebody who wants to participate, I think there will be ways for the utilities to work with investing in community solar programs that our customers can participate in that provides the lowest cost pathway to clean energy access, and that's what we'll continue to work toward.
So we started a few minutes late, so I'm going to let us go a few minutes long as well, but then I'll wrap up to be mindful of your time, and also because I know there's a reception. It's been a long day. People probably want to get out to the reception. So I'm just going to call one more person to ask a question. Sir.
Oh, go Boilers.
We still, as you know, we still produce a lot and use a lot of coal.
Yeah.
But in the last decade, we've discovered that we also have sun and wind. And immediately north of your old haunt at Purdue on I-65 is one of the largest wind installations in the nation now. But we don't talk about nuclear. What should we be thinking about the future of nuclear, both in California and outside?
Yeah. One, I'm very gratified that our governor and the legislature has taken actions to allow at least a temporary extension of Diablo Canyon. That was smart to do. When we look at all of the facts and we can see that base load, carbon-free energy at a very low unit cost of existing infrastructure, we should utilize those assets. And so we are proud to operate Diablo Canyon Power Plant. We are proud that we will be filing for a license. We have filed and have been given interim approval from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for a 20-year license. The legislature here in California has only authorized us to extend 5 years beyond 2025. But I am sure that conditions will not change that much that I'm not sure, but I expect that there will be a conversation at the 5-year window comes nearer and nearer that maybe we should extend that further. I think that would be a good policy to utilize a safe, high-performing asset for the state. I'll just tell you one quick story. I was at INPO is the International or the Institute of Nuclear Power Operators, and they manage and assess all of our. They don't manage our plants, but they assess all of our plants every other year. We get a score. There's a big deal. CEOs can get fired over a bad score. I can tell you that right now. I'm very tuned into our score. But it's all about how safely you operate a nuclear plant. And that's part of the reason why our nuclear fleet nationwide is so safe. But I attended the annual awards ceremony, and they were naming the units that received the highest exemplary performance. And they were naming them in the sequence of who had the most. So they started with those over the life of the assets, who had the least amount of exemplary ratings, and who had the most. Well, let me just say this. I got through the hors d'oeuvre, the salad, the dinner, the dessert, the coffee. I'm like, come on now. We were the second to the last plant recognized, and that means we had the second to highest performance over decades at our nuclear plant here in California. We have great people in San Luis Obispo who are running that plant quietly, doing their job extremely well every day. They're a blueprint for the rest of the company. And I just suggest that nuclear should be part of the future. Now, small modular reactors, I think, are very interesting. It is unlikely that PG&E will take on that challenge until the technology is proven, but there are companies who are taking on that challenge, and I am rooting for them and hope that we can find an additional source of base load generation, or carbon-free generation, to support the growth of our nation.
So I want to say thank you, Patty,
Yeah.
for coming and engaging in this conversation and taking questions. And I just want to really appreciate you coming and doing this. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Can I add one last thing? Yeah, one more. Thank you. You know, I just want to add one, closing comment. First of all, it's a privilege and an honor to be here at Stanford, and I'm proud to call it my alma mater, and it's wonderful to be here. But I just want you to know that the people of PG&E are getting up every day to serve you. I wear this pin. It's a little ladybug, and I just want you to know what we're up to. There was a fire in 2020, before I came, but it was a family, and there was a little girl, Fayla, who would be turning 12 on the 14th of this month. And she died when she was 8 years old in the car with her mother, trying to get out of a fire that was caused by a green tree landing on one of our power lines. Our team will make it safe. We are making it safe. It's dramatically safer. The posture in California is dramatically different. But I just want you to know, when we're, debating issues and thinking about that, I never stop thinking about that. It will be safe, and we will make it right. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, I should have asked if you had a few last words
That's
you
okay.
wanted to say. That was like totally bad
That's all right.
moderator
That's no good.
behavior.
We're
Because
late.
I was
We're
like
late.
focused on, I have some last words I want to
Yes,
say.
yeah.
But yeah.
It's back to you,
So
Ken.
But
Back to you.
I do want to say a few words because a few years ago, John Levin asked me and Jim Coulter to co-lead this task force on business, government, society, which kind of is the lead into this forum and many other things going on around the school. And so this is actually just my thoughts about this whole thing going on at the school. So this is separate from our conversation, but I just wanted to share a few concluding thoughts on today's event. And what I see and what I hope for out of this is getting more engagement by our students, by our faculty, by our alumni, with business leaders and with politicians and regulators and civil society leaders who are grappling with really tough questions about the role of business in society. And I think it's really useful to recognize simultaneously that business can have just tremendously positive impacts in society. And also that not everything is a win-win or a win-win-win. There are things that are not win-win-wins. And so then we're in a world of trade-offs, which is the world, much of the world we live in. Then there need to be decisions made. And that's true for business leaders, making principled decisions as the leaders of organizations about what are the priorities, what is the focus going to be, what can we not focus on because we need to focus only on certain things and not on everything that people care about. But it's also really important for citizens and for policymakers because the things that really make possible this entire enterprise of business and capitalism is society, actually, and governments actually setting the structure that makes this possible. And it's really the thing, and those sorts of structures in society are what can channel the really positive, productive, innovative energies of business and capitalism in ways that are beneficial for a lot of people in society. And I think it's really important to support that endeavor as well, the civil society and government angle of this, as well as companies doing the right thing and making good decisions. Now, what should those decisions be? What should those policies be, both within a company and in society as a whole? That's a hard question. And I think amongst people in this room, there's a lot of disagreement about that. And amongst people outside of this room, there's a lot of disagreement about that as well. So those are the conversations that we need to be continually having, and having those sorts of respectful disagreements about how things should function at the intersection of business, government, and society. So that's just what I wanted to say before handing things over to John Levitt.
Great. So first of all, thank you, Patty. That was amazing. So proud to have you as an alum leading PG&E. And thank you to Ken for, first of all, terrific moderation and for helping to kick off this whole initiative and for those wonderful words to conclude the event. I have a couple more people I want to thank to close up, and then we can go out to the reception. So I want to thank, in particular, all of the speakers who came from all over the world to speak today, and the faculty members who crafted the sessions that we attended all day. They were amazing. I learned a ton, and I just thought the tenor of discussion, the interaction, as Ken said, the respectful agreement was just a model. It was really wonderful to hear. I want to thank the GSB staff that organized this event. An event like this takes an incredible amount of work, and the staff at the GSB did just a fabulous job. And finally, I want to recognize two people. Professor Joe Piotrowski, who's sitting up here in the front row, is the faculty member who put together the entire program for the day. So thank you to Joe for doing the program. And then our executive director of the Business Government Society Initiative, Maria France, who's also here in the front row, organized the whole event. And finally, I want to thank all of you who came and attended in this session. We ran this as a sort of an experiment to see what it would be like to try to bring a big group together for an entire day to have discussions with faculty and students and alumni and leaders from friends of Stanford. And we'll be interested to hear what you thought, but I thought it was just fabulous, and what an exciting day and a wonderful way to interact and debate a whole set of incredibly interesting and important questions. So thank you all for being here. It was wonderful. And now we could go out and have a drink and continue the discussion.